This video is sponsored by the Ides of March, a golden ticket Warhammer 40k event happening on March 8th through 9th, 2025. More about them later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last week of 40k events and talk about what is currently winning. This is for the weekend of February 8th and 9th, 2025. And while there were a lot of events this week, we're actually not going to talk about that many lists. Now, the reason for that is twofold. First of all, we cover single-player events in this video series, and a lot of the events from this weekend were team event. In fact, I am currently traveling back from the North Carolina ATC, which I live streamed over on the channel. You can go watch the games from that over on the live tab of my channel if you're interested. Lots of really tight team format Warhammer 40k. Now, in addition, we're seeing a little bit of a compression of the metagame to a couple top factions. So with that, let's dive into a metagame breakdown and discuss what factions those are. Now, the first one is Astra Militarum. They took down 3 events this weekend with undefeated players, including the Beachhead Brawl, Bolton GT, and Grand Clash 2025. The Beachhead Brawl is the largest singles event of the weekend. It was a 200-player super major, and we are going to be talking about all of the undefeated players who went 6-0 at that tournament, one of them being obviously Astra Militarum. All of these running very similar Bridgehead strike lists. Now, in fairness, Astra Militarum do have a new codex that they're going to be operating out of, and many of these armies played units that are now legended. The undefeated army at Bridgehead Brawl did not, which is why we're going to discuss it, but that is a little bit of a caveat. That said, Bridgehead Strike is unlikely to get worse with the advent of the new Militarum Codex. In fact, they may even get better because they're getting additional damage output out of units like Tempestus Scions. This detachment is incredible, and Astra Militarum is constantly taking it to greater and greater heights, and I imagine we're going to continue to see that when the new Codex comes out. Now, next up is Chaos Demons. These are benefiting enormously from the Legion of Excess detachment, which is skyrocketing the win rate of this faction. However, we've talked about Legion of Excess quite a bit on the channel over the last couple of weeks since it was released during Grotsmas. That said, the list that went undefeated at the Beachhead Brawl, Chaos Demons went undefeated there, as well as the Wizards GT, was not running Legion of Excess. They were running the Index Detachment Demonic Incursion, which is, if I may say so myself, a damn sight more interesting. So that is what we're going to discuss this time around. Tyranids, also interestingly coming out of the woodwork with 2 undefeated results. We saw a Vanguard Onslaught as well as an Invasion Fleet go undefeated this weekend at VetCon Winter 2025, as well as the Grand Clash 2025. Blood Angels also doing fairly well. We're seeing multiple different varieties of Space Marines continuously using their very powerful Oaths of Moment update from the latest data slate. Both Blood Angels and Ultramarines with several undefeated lists. Beachhead Brawl and Frosthammer saw undefeated Blood Angels armies, and Ultramarines took down the Warzone Atlanta, a very large event. That was John Lennon from Team Art of War, and we'll discuss his wild list in this video. Drukhari, interestingly, also undefeated at the Wizards GT. Nice to see them come out of the woodwork a little bit, since it's been a while since we saw Drukhari see great success. We also saw the New South Wales Masters with a weird result, 2 almost identical lists fighting in the finals for a final result of 4-0-1 between them, those being Imperial and Chaos Knights. Now, if there is not a greater indication that a particular metagame is conducive to a certain style of army, I don't know what is, but we will talk about both of these lists that went undefeated at the New South Wales Masters. Now, speaking of that event, let's talk about where you can watch some of this coverage. First of all, the Australis Tabletop Wargaming Network was live with coverage from the New South Wales Masters. Please go check them out over on their live streams. Wargames Live, after a little bit of a hiatus, was back this week, live streaming the Warzone Atlanta. So if you want to see John Lennon and his Ultramarines live on stream, you can go check them out over on the Wargames Live channel.
I missed them the first time around I recorded this, but Tabletop Live is also live this weekend, streaming the Grand Clash 2025.
And last but certainly not least, me. Obviously, I talked about the North Carolina ATC coverage. That was a 150-player team event, and I covered all 5 rounds of that, several games each round. So if you want some more exposure to Team 40k, please go check that out again on my channel. I'm done plugging myself, but what I will do is plug support for my channel. But now I'm done plugging myself, but before we get into lists, let's plug somebody else because it's time for a sponsor segment. The Ides of March are approaching. And you should beware of missing the Ides of March GT held by Treasure Trove Keep on March 8th through 9th, 2025. This is the second year that the Ides of March Grand Tournament will be running, and if you are just hearing about it for the first time ever, it is a 100-player GT held up in Rockport, Maine. The event is held at the Samoset Resort, an absolutely gorgeous location taken from me as someone who was there last year. Oh my god. The location is incredible. You get wonderful views and beautiful weather while you're playing some Warhammer 40k. In addition to a 5-round Warhammer 40k GT, there is also a 100-player AOS event if you're more of a fantasy connoisseur. There is also the Ides of March Golden Brush painting competition that is judged by none other than Goobertown Hobbies. So if you don't want to be a goober yourself, you should head on over to treasuretrovekeep.com/Ides of March 2025 and go get yourself a ticket. I'll also be there at the event live streaming, so you can catch coverage of it here on the channel, but really I would rather see you on camera in person at the tournament. So get your tickets today and I'll see you there. Now let's go ahead and launch into the Beachhead Brawl 2025. This was a 200-player major level event being played over in Great Britain. And this one was taken down by Blood Angels, Astra Militarum, and Chaos Demons with undefeated results. As I mentioned before, we are going to talk about all three of these factions and all of these lists. And I think we'll just rip that band-aid off and do all three of them right now, starting with Martin Cooper and his Astra Militarum. This is a bridgehead strike detachment. Martin was running a unit of Gaunt's Ghost as well as several Militarum Tempestus command squads. That is 3 in total, one of them rocking the Bombast class Vox array. This is the enhancement that allows them to triple their orders when they issue them. Hugely powerful if you're able to up down that unit and constantly be ordering new units that are coming out of reserve over and over and over again to generate additional orders for your infantry squads, and definitely helps the list keep up with its infantry orders. 2 tank commanders for some heavy shooting with multi-meltas and demolisher cannons, as well as Ursula Creed for CP discounting. We then have 2 units of Catachan jungle fighters, so we can gum up the midboard with a bunch of scouting infantry alongside 2 units of infantry squads, and because we have a Tempestor Prime as our warlord, we can take Battle Line and OC2 Tempestus Scions, and that includes 1 unit of 10 as well as 3 units of 5 to attach those Tempestor command squads into. Interesting that we are only taking the small units here. Now, in addition to that, we're also taking 3 sets of heavy weapon teams. These are equipped with mortars, kind of a standard inclusion to Bridgehead Strike because they're able to benefit from the reroll ones to hit. Well, they don't get any of the other benefits from the detachment ability. It is still a lot of very effective indirect fire that can clear screens and engage with the opponent before the big units come in for very, very inexpensive, and gives Ursula Creed something to do with her orders in the early game as well. We then also have 2 standard Leman Russ battle tanks and a unit of Tempestus Aquilons. Now, what's interesting about this list is this emphasis on Leman Russ. In addition, these Leman Russ are equipped with different sponson mounts. We have one of them running double multi-meltas and one of them running double plasma cannons. That usually allows us to push one Leman Russ pretty far forward up the battlefield in the early game to get those heavier anti-tank, higher AP shots off at enemies in the center of the battlefield. However, the plasma cannon tank is usually a little bit more of a ranged support unit. Now, we don't really have too many orders available for these guys, but what we can do with these Leman Russ battle tanks is use them as trading options early, allowing us to commit heavy tanks to the battlefield with additional movement, or just using them as hammer pieces to kill enemy armored targets without having to expose the tank commanders, since the tank commander can just order the Leman Russ and then push them forward. So we're seeing much less emphasis on the Tempestus Scion aspect of the detachment, where it's typically that we'll see 40 or 50 Tempestus Scions in this slot here, and instead we're focusing a little bit more heavily on those armored vehicles in order to do that really heavy vehicle killing. Obviously, one of the big downsides, at least in the current incarnation of the rules, until they get access to wound rerolls from their data sheet ability, is the big downsides of the Tempestus Scions is that they don't really shoot into heavy armor very well. You're rolling a lot of 4-ups to wound without any rerolls or other dice fixing, beyond the +1 to wound that they get from setting up on the battlefield, and that can get a little bit awkward. The Leman Russ battle tanks, however, are much more efficient at that, so that's really interesting to see. Very different variety of Bridgehead Strike that almost plays more like a combined regiment that's taking these combination of these tanks and infantry rather than just all infantry like most of the Bridgehead Strikes we've seen, but it definitely feels like the more well-rounded army is a little bit more situated to a single-player meta where you're going to have to deal with a wide variety of enemies. With that, let's move back to our lists here and discuss the next one. That's going to be our other faction with 3 undefeated results. Byron Siju running Chaos Demons. Now, Byron, as I mentioned at the top of the video, was running Demonic Incursion, which is a little interesting because we have not really seen Demonic Incursion put up too many powerful results since Legion of Excess released and ended up being really, really, really good. That being said, however, last month, Demonic Incursion got a huge buff. They got the ability to charge out of their 6-inch deep strike anywhere on the battlefield. Previously, the detachment ability allowed you to set up 6 inches away from enemies and then charge if you were wholly within Shadow of Chaos. However, you had a close deep strike stratagem. It started at 3 inches, then it moved to 6 inches. The downside was that if you used the stratagem, you couldn't charge. So usually the way that the detachment worked was that you would use the stratagem to close deep strike a Shadow in the Warp generator like Be'lakor or one of the other greater demons. Then with that Shadow of Chaos aura, I think I keep calling it Shadow in the Warp, but that's Tyranids. I'm very Tyranid pilled this weekend. But with that Shadow of Chaos aura in place, you could then deep strike units 6 inches away from enemies and then charge with them. That's no longer necessary. You can just pay a CP, drop a unit down wherever, 6 inches away from an enemy, and immediately charge, which means you're basically never safe from this army unless you have Omni Scrambler auras, 12-inch deep strike denial auras, or you just have insane, crazy capacity to screen, which is really cool. Obviously, the damage output, especially compared to Legion of Excess, and the amount of trickery is not quite there, but the maneuverability and the repositional effects that Demonic Incursion have are still almost unparalleled in 40k. So with that, we have Be'lakor. He's there because he has a Shadow of Chaos aura for any demon, so anyone is allowed to deep strike off of him. You can also use him in the early game to restrict enemy capacity to shoot you, so you can play kind of aggressively with your ground pounding demons and your opponent still can't get in and attack you in the turn 1 because he has this aura that makes everything an 18-inch lone operative within 6 inches of him. We then have Shalaxi Hellbane, Scarbrand, and Ed, the Endless Gift Great Unclean One, who has a bunch of wounds because he's got a 4+, feel no pain. Scarbrand's interesting in here. He's a Bloodthirster with a flat 6 damage melee weapon, which is crazy powerful. Downside is that he's very inconsistent. He has no rerolls to speak of. However, he's only 300 points, and for a Greater Demon, that's phenomenal. And with the ability to just either rapid ingress him or pay a CP and 6-inch deep strike him outside of wherever you want, he is a basically point-and-click adventure game. You get to pay a CP through one of the stratagems you're going to use to deliver him to the battlefield, jump him down anywhere, and kill one of anything, and then force your opponent to deal with him. And that's pretty okay. We then have a Plague Bearer unit to lock down the home objective. Big benefit here in Demonic Incursion. While we do see Plague Bearers in most other armies to lock the home objective and then screen or act as utility or push up to flip objectives in the center of the board, the big benefit in Demonic Incursion is that with these guys can then pick up after they lock an objective during the opponent's turn and then drop and charge in somewhere and flip an objective much more easily. We then have 3 units of Fiends. We can't really escape the Slanesh, I guess, anymore. These guys just are very good, kind of aggressive anti-infantry melee units, and even without the mass rerolls that we get from Legion of Excess, Fiend's still a pretty solid beast unit all by themselves. Last and certainly not least, we then have 3 units of Screamers as well. These guys are just in here for the fact that they're really fast, and also they hit relatively hard. They have a bombing run effect, so if they're able to tag you with a movement before the charge phase, they can do 1 to 2 mortal wounds on average. Then they're going to charge in their monster anti-vehicle force, so they do some pretty serious damage anyway. One of the big downsides of Chaos Demons right now, at least in my opinion, is the fact that their Space Marine matchup is not that great. However, I think the Fiends do change that quite a bit, because for 105 points, you have a unit that will almost certainly kill 5, 6, 7 Space Marine bodies pretty consistently, and you can kind of save them to trade out with smaller utility units, scouts, and jump pack intercessors and things like that, until the point at which you have cleared enough screens that you can deliver units like Shalaxi, Hellbane, and Scarbrand into your opponent's heavier armor, and those vehicles and larger stuff will not survive those big greater demons. Once those guys get stuck in, they're going to kill whatever it is. Not to mention the fact that you have pretty long threat ranges on all of these kind of utility units. They're fast, they're beasts, so they can move through walls, so they're good at scoring. And then you can kind of dominate the middle of the table with the Great Unclean One, and always have range to counterpunch whatever comes in to try to deal with him with those Fiends and those other units. The Fiends will also project a -1 to hit aura as well in melee, so they can actually make the Great Unclean One even harder to hit on top of his already ludicrously difficult to move bulk. Now with that, we're speaking of Space Marines, let's move over to Space Marines and talk about the number one placer here at Beachhead Brawl, Nicholas Willingdale, who was running Blood Angels. Now, Nicholas was playing a bit of a dirty Blood Angels army. I think I heard somebody call this Bloodless Angels, which I appreciated. That sounded pretty cool, but this is a Blood Angels army using no Blood Angels unique units, no units with the Blood Angels chapter keyword, which means it still gains the +1 to wound bonus from targeting its Oath of Moment target. We've talked about these armies quite a bit over on the channel in the last couple of weeks since they started getting very, very popular. Liberator Assault Group is a ridiculously powerful detachment, gives you huge damage in melee, in addition to access to a ton of really powerful stratagems, Advance and Charge, for example, Lance and melee, all this stuff that is super duper strong. The one downside is that it is Blood Angels, and if you are taking any of the Blood Angel stuff, you lose that really powerful Oath of Moment, but many armies have just issued things like Sanguinary Guard, Dante, Mephiston, and instead just taken regular Space Marine stuff and given them the bonuses from Oaths of Moment. Very controversial rule, but obviously it is the law of the land for now. This includes a Captain with Speed of the Primarch, so he gets his once per game fight first, as well as a Judiciar with a Gift of Foresight, so he gets an auto 6 once per turn. You can use that especially to flip his Devastating Weapon into auto 6s to wound, so he can devastate at least one time after rolling, which is pretty strong. From there, we have 3 units of 5 just standard Assault Intercessors. We're using lots of these aggressive OC2 infantry that are good at trading out enemies on objectives, and we're able to use them to keep our opponent off of balance when it comes to scoring. So we can put them in dedicated transports, things like an Impulsor. We can cycle them out. One unit can start in the Impulsor, hop out 3 inches, advance and charge, and go blow something out on an objective. They'll kill 5 enemy Space Marines or 10 infantry pretty easily because they're getting that +1 attack and the +2 strength from Liberator Assault Group. Then we can refill the Impulsor with another unit and just keep going. We then have 3 units of Jump Pack Assault Intercessors as well. I think that the FBI comes to your house if you don't take 3 of these in a Liberator Assault Group. It's just kind of classic. We got some shooting being brought by Ballistus Dreadnoughts. Real nice thing here is that these guys will kind of operate by themselves without really needing any support because they can get their hit rerolls built in for free if they target something that's not below half strength. So they don't need Oaths of Moment to deal damage, although they definitely benefit from it. But that allows us to get real efficient shooting without having to burn our Oath of Moment, and we can save our Oath of Moment, put on whatever the Assault Intercessors are jumping into. We then have 2 Incursor squads. You guys have nice synergy with the Detachment because they're getting a lot of additional attacks and strength on top of the fact that they have sustained hits baked into their weapons, AP1 baked into their weapons, and they'll buff the Ballistus Dreadnoughts in shooting when they shoot something with their bolter. Interestingly, too, they also have assault weapons. The Oculus Bolt Carbine is an assault weapon, so they're able to advance, shoot, and then also charge. If they pay the 1 CP to charge, they don't have to battle shock themselves to do that. So they can actually act as basically another instance of these little units that can go trade with enemy units while also benefiting the shooting attacks with +1 to hit on the way in, which is really nice for just 1 CP. We then have an Infiltrator squad, 3 Predator Destructors as well, Scout squad, and a Storm Speeder Hammer Strike. So we also have the cover stripping effect of the Hammer Strike to buff all of the relatively mid-weight shooting we have. The Predator Destructors and the Ballistus Dreadnoughts are kind of middle AP, but these things go absolutely wild once you put Oaths of Moment on them. The Predator Destructors are firing a ton of shots, 2 las cannons and 6 Destructor autocannon shots. You can give them +1 to hit with the Incursors, +1 to wound with Oaths of Moment, ignore cover with the Hammer Strike, and just let them go to town. So we're kind of playing a little bit of an Iron Storm Spearhead style of build, but we're also backing that up with essentially 8 of these little 5-man units that will trade up spectacularly in the fight phase thanks to the Liberator Assault Group melee bonuses. And that's one of the reasons that this rule that allows you to benefit from the +1 to wound thanks to Oaths of Moment in Blood Angels is a little controversial because Liberator Assault Group kind of has that baked in with its melee bonuses, and it's a little bit strange that we can get it also on our ranged attacks while also taking some of the most efficient melee units in the faction thanks to the Detachment ability. But clearly it's a hugely powerful composition of army because we are able to fight both in the shooting phase and the fight phase with some of the best armies in the game. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the United States and Atlanta, Georgia, and discuss Warzone Atlanta. Now, I mentioned that this was streamed over by Wargames Live, so if you want to see coverage of this event, you can go check it out over there. This was won by John Lennon from Team Art of War. He was rocking an Ultramarine list. Now, we've talked about his very unique take on Ultramarines. He calls it the Blue Scars because it's essentially a White Scars list, but he's playing with Ultramarines because you get all of the crazy powerful characters in addition to getting that big benefit from Oaths of Moment. But we've talked about this variety of lists in the past, and it's really, really unique. So it is a Stormlands task force, so we are getting that bonus to advance and charge. Everything in the army can advance and charge. Very nice. We also have stratagems to do things like get -1 to hit and wound for our flying units, and we have access to lance for mounted units, and we have access to reactive moves for anything in the army, hugely powerful, as well as assault for anything in the army. So we can be advancing, shooting, and charging with some of these units, which is wild. So we have Marneus Calgar. He already advances, shoots, and charges with his unit if he's attached with his company heroes, which we're taking to attach him into. I don't have much to say about this unit. I think it's pretty classically super strong. Robuta Gilliman, we've talked about him a million times as well. Not much to say there. We have a standard intercessor squad just to sweep some infantry, act as a utility unit, and lock our backline objectives. Pretty classic inclusion as well. 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts because they're really, really, really good at shooting. Pretty standard. 1 Incursor squad so we can get a bonus to our shooting attacks. Same combo that we just talked about with the Blood Angels as well. These guys are able to advance, shoot naturally because they have assault weapons and then also charge, which is nice with AP1 weapons. Infiltrator squad to protect the backline from deep strikes, especially close range deep strikes. An Outrider squad, a nice little inclusion here as a utility unit. They're move 12 still. They can advance and charge. They get that +1 strength and damage on the charge, and you can lance with them. So even if they don't charge the Oath target, they can go into a unit of like 2 wound models and have a pretty good chance of killing them because they're going to be wounding most infantry on the game on 2s with AP1 2 damage attacks, which is pretty solid. Scout squad for forward operation, and then 2 Stormspeeder Hammer Strikes and a Storm Raven gunship. So we have the capacity with the Storm Raven gunship here to really dominate the center of the table. This thing is an aircraft. It's not very good at actually like taking and holding table space, but what it does do is it can absorb ludicrous amounts of damage. It can also transport some of this stuff around if we want to get a little bit more aggressive. Oh yeah, one thing I should mention, it's actually not 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, it's 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts and a Brutalis Dreadnought, misspoke earlier there. But one thing we can do with the Storm Raven gunship is actually transport the Brutalis Dreadnought up into the fight, so we can get it closer to then get its advance and charge onto something impactful. Tank shock with the Brutalis Dreadnought, deal the Brutalis impact attacks, then fight with it and do a ton of damage, kind of act as this little nuclear missile we can use by itself. The Storm Raven gunship all the while can get up to these aggressive positions because it's so hard to kill. They're -1 damage built in. They can be -1 to be hit and -1 to be wounded and -1 OC if you Armor of Contempt it, all stacked on top of each other. And once you add those 3 layers of defense, this thing gets super difficult to take down, and that's all benefited from the fact that we have 25 command points that we're spending thanks to Marneus Calgar and Robuta Gilliman. So we have the CP to just dump into these big hefty vehicles and keep them going for days and days. Now, the shooting from the Storm Raven gunship isn't that great, but when we consider that we also have Incursors and we have Stormspeeder Hammer Strike, so we can get +1 to hit and ignore cover, potentially +1 to wound as well from Oaths of Moment, suddenly these Hurricane Bolters, these Missile Launchers, Plasma Cannons, Multi-Meltas all start doing crazy damage from this thing as well. So the Storm Raven gunship is super strong in this detachment. Any detachment where you can add additional defensive technology to it gets incredibly powerful with these guys, and given the fact that it also has great synergy with the Dreadnoughts, especially with the Brutalis Dreadnought, is extra gravy right on top. It's also important to note that we do have the access to things like the reactive moves as well as the -1 to hit and wound for the Hammer Strikes, so we can play those a little bit more aggressively than you typically see Hammer Strikes get played, and they can still survive despite the fact that they are going to be running out into harm's way. A lot of times you baby your Hammer Strike so you can make sure that your opponent doesn't get shots back on it, or you force your opponent to overextend if they want to shoot the Hammer Strike in order to get multiple activations out of it. But with this army, there's a very good chance we can make it very difficult to kill, and we have 2 of them just in case. So we can play them a little bit more aggressively, use their meltas more aggressively, benefit from all these range synergies that we have with this army. I've talked at length about this army in the past. It's actually extremely clever. John Lennon continues to be a very creative army builder, and this army is super cool. Definitely has a lot of power behind it, but also very technical as well. Now with that, we're going to move over to Wichita, and we're going to talk about the Wizards GT. We did have some Chaos Demons do well at this one with some crazy results on their score sheet. That was Brent Simon there, but that was a Legion of Excess. So we're not going to talk so much about that. Instead, we are going to talk about Drukhari. Cody Giroux went undefeated with Drukhari at this event, and that's very exciting because Drukhari has been in a little bit of a doldrums for a while. That said, we are running Reaper's Wager this time around, and it's going to be an interesting question about how well this detachment does once we see the new Harlequin datasheets from the new Eldari Codex start to see some play. So, what was Cody playing this time? This includes an Archon with Webway Walker, so he grants his unit Deep Strike as well as the ability to reroll charges if his army is losing the wager, or if his side of the army is losing the wager at the time that he rolls that charge. We have 2 Beastmasters to gum up the middle of the table, as well as Lilith Hasperax. We then have a Kabalite Warrior unit, a Rack unit, a Witch unit, a Court of the Archon to hop in with that Archon, alongside 2 Chronos, 2 units of 3 Grotesques for a little bit more resilient infantry, 2 units of Mandrakes, 2 units of Scourges, all of those with Dark Lances. It's important to note, so we don't have any Haywire Blaster equipped Scourges, as well as 2 units of Talos and a Void Raven Bomber. Now, here's the interesting thing about this list. Reaper's Wager is the detachment where you take Harlequins and you take Drukhari, and you compete them against each other to give them rerolls if the other half of the army is outcompeting you. The weird thing about this army is that we have no Harlequins. So we are playing, because Drukhari start by winning the wager, so they don't gain the rerolls. We start with no detachment ability, and we gain no detachment ability over the course of the game. Now, that said, what we get Reaper's Wager is the fact that our stratagems are phenomenal. We have in the shooting phase or fight phase lethal or sustained hits, advance, shoot, and charge, a fight on death, ignore Overwatch, -1 to be hit in the fight phase, as well as a reactive move. This is one of the best sets of stratagems that we could compose for a Drukhari army. The downside, obviously, is that we are required to take Harlequins if we want the detachment ability to work. Instead, we're not doing that. So despite the fact that they have basically no synergy with the detachment, generally speaking, we can do things like take 2 units of 2 Talos and Void Raven Bombers, and we can use things like sustained hits in the Void Raven Bomber, which can get empowered to then gain rerolls to hit and trigger those sustained additional times. And we can get reactive moves on things like the Talos or -1 to hit in the fight phase. So we can make these big, bricky units super difficult to pin down, super difficult to kill, and we can make anything in the detachment hit way harder. Otherwise, this detachment plays very similar to a Real Space Raid or a Sky Splinter Assault, despite the fact that we aren't taking any transport. So we are just playing regular foot Drukhari today. We do have the Kabalite Warrior unit that can attach with the Court of the Archon as well as with the Archon itself, and he is granting that unit Deep Strike. So we can rapid ingress them, we can jump them onto the table, give them sustained hits, full hit and wound rerolls, thanks to the Archon's ability, and just dumpster enemy infantry, because we have so much anti-infantry shooting inside that unit. We have a lot of these Beastmasters to gum up the works in the early game, in the midboard, and we have reactive moves potentially for them as well. Lilith for sweeping infantry, and then coming up behind those Beastmasters are going to be these Talos and this Void Raven Bomber that's going to Deep Strike in later on in the game. So lots and lots of control of the middle of the table and competition over objectives. Back that up with some pretty solid shooting from the Scourges and things. And this is just a classic composition of Drukhari units that we're just using some of the best stratagems on for the army, giving up our detachment ability for some incredible stratagems. And that worked. That put Cody up here at 5-0 with some incredible results. Did have a 62-point win in there. That's a close one with a 72-point win and a 78-point win. But other than that, 3 100-point results for Cody. What a wild result for this army, and what a wild army to take a look at. This one is crazy, but clearly very effective. Now, with that, we're going to move to the other side of the planet, over in New South Wales, Australia, for the New South Wales Masters. And this event was tied by both Jordan McGregor and Zach Futura. I will mention as well that this was streamed over by Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, so please go check them out if you want to see these games streamed live. Also, shout out to Zach Futura, who plays on the TacticalTortoise Discord quite a bit, which is awesome cool to see him see some success IRL as well. Now, I will give a little bit of a shout out to Jordan McGregor for the absolutely priceless memes in his list. You can submit lists in BCP, Best Coast Pairings, using a picture format, but it has to be only a picture format. So you can't embed pictures inside the list submission. So what he's done is he's created his entire army into a meme. Yeah, is this Chaos Knights? No, it is a Imperial Knights Noble Lance. He has subjected us to this picture export of his army simply for the fact that he can include a classic meme into the top of his export there. This includes Armiger Helvrin times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Armiger Moirax with a Siege Claw times 1 and a Conversion Beamer. Plus Armiger Warglaves times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 13 Armigers. We are required to take a Ministorum Priest in order to be the Warlord, because unlike Chaos Knights, Imperial Knights have no non-Titanic characters inside the faction, so we have to take an Imperial Agent to be our Warlord. That is totally legal. You simply can't make Assassins your Warlord. You have to take a non-Assassin character, but you can just make him the Warlord. Importantly here, the Ministorum Priest can embark into a Immolator, one of the Ordo Hereticus Immolators that Agents of the Imperium unlock, which allows us to take that transport. That thing can then strip cover from that thing can then shoot a target, strip cover from it, and you can then apply Armiger Helvrin liberally to the affected area. You can give them the stratagem for +1 AP. We can be up to AP2, ignore cover, and a lot of units in the game, especially flying units, where they can get their Sky Sweeper protocols online, just wilt to that volume of fire with that high AP value. We also then have Watch Captain Artemis as a little bit of a lone operator there. Altogether, pretty classic build here. We're just maximizing our Layload the Tyrant reroll 1 hit and 1 wound roll, and unlocking some pretty sweet memes at the same time. You can't fault that. It is nice to see Imperial Knights winning. It is sad that there are no actual Knights in the Imperial Knight list, but I think you gotta take what you can get at this point when we are talking about victorious Imperial Knight lists. Now, the tie list for this one was Zach Futura, and this is the funny thing about this list. Zach was running Traitoris Lance and a bunch of War Dogs, not Armigers this time around, just the little Arf War Dogs, War Dog Stalker, Brigands times 6, Carnivores times 5, plus Poxbringer for actions, because he can Deep Strike, as well as 2 units of 3 Nurglings for forward operation. Pretty normal stuff from this one. The funny thing is that these armies, I guess they didn't play each other because they did not fight. However, they both went 4-0-1 because they had a 10-10 drop on their record. Jordan McGregor was able to edge out Zach Futura on tiebreakers because of the differential scoring. That draw was due to differential scoring, so I don't know who exactly scored higher in that game. But the funny thing is that we had 2 almost identical armies from 2 separate factions that had placed 1 and 2 at this event. So I don't know what it is about this one. Maybe it's a metagame thing. Maybe it's a terrain thing. But clearly, these armies with 12 to 13 Armiger chassis vehicles are incredibly effective down in New South Wales. Australia is a wild place. Maybe they need to get out in Armiger exosuits in order to defeat all of the spiders and the snakes that are coming out of their walls down there. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But it is cool to see that these armies see some success, whereas in other metagames, they are struggling a little bit. And with that is going to be all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video, and thanks as well to everybody who supports the TacticalTortoise. Don't forget to go check out Ides of March down in the video description, Treasure Trove Keep / Ides of March 2025. That is the link to go check out that event. Big thanks to them for sponsoring the video, and big thanks to you for watching all the way to the end. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.